Life at Roosevelt High School was anything but ordinary for 15-year-old Rhea. Every morning, she would wave goodbye to her father 2 blocks away from school, watching him take a different route to the same destination. It wasn't that she was ashamed, far from it. Her father, Mr. Kumar, was one of the most respected educators she knew. But being the principal's daughter, that was a whole different story. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees lining the school entrance as Rhea adjusted her backpack, joining the stream of students flowing through the main doors. 3 months had passed since her father took over as principal, and so far they'd managed to keep their connection under wraps. Only a handful of administrative staff knew, and they had been surprisingly good at keeping the secret. "Hey," called out her best friend May, bouncing up to her with the usual morning enthusiasm that Rhea both envied and appreciated. "Did you finish that history project?" "I was up until midnight getting those dates right." Rhea nodded, grateful for the normal conversation. These moments were precious, when she could just be herself, not someone's daughter, not the principal's secret kid, just Rhea. She'd gotten pretty good at navigating the double life. When students complained about the new principal's strict policies, she'd mastered the art of the non-committal shrug. When they praised his improvements to the school lunch program, she'd smile quietly, storing away their words to share with him later at home. The hallways buzzed with the usual morning chaos, freshmen scrambling to find their classrooms, seniors lounging against lockers with the confidence of people who'd ruled these halls for years, and teachers clutching their coffee cups like lifelines. Through a window, Rhea caught a glimpse of her father in his crisp blue suit, walking across the courtyard with the vice principal. Even from a distance, she could read his body language, shoulders straight, head slightly tilted in that way it did when he was listening intently. It was strange seeing him in his principal mode, so different from the dad who made terrible puns at breakfast and still couldn't figure out how to use the new coffee maker. In class, Rhea sat near the middle, not too front, not too back. Another carefully calculated move to avoid drawing attention. Her notebooks were filled with little doodles in the margins, something her father always teased her about at home. "Those little drawings tell better stories than some books I've read," he'd say, examining her notebook during homework time. The decision to keep their relationship private had come after a long family discussion. Her father had just been offered the principal position, a significant step up from his previous role as a high school administrator in another district. They'd moved to this new town for his opportunity, but he'd made it clear that Rhea's well-being came first. "You should have the chance to make your own way," he told her, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Being the principal's daughter can be complicated. People might treat you differently, have expectations, make assumptions. Let's give it some time, let you settle in, make friends on your own terms." And she had. She'd joined the school newspaper, made friends in the photography club, and even signed up for the debate team. Her grades were good but not perfect. She'd earned every B+ and A herself, thank you very much. The art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had even asked to display one of her photographs in the upcoming school art show. But keeping the secret wasn't always easy. There were moments when she wanted to defend her father against unfair criticisms, times when she burned to explain why certain school policies made sense from an administrator's perspective. The hardest part was pretending not to know him when they passed in the hallways. They'd practiced their neutral passes at home, laughing as they walked past each other in their living room, pretending to be strangers. Some days, Rhea wondered if they were doing the right thing. Was keeping this secret actually protecting her, or was it just delaying the inevitable? She'd seen how some students treated the counselor's son, always asking him for favors, trying to get inside information. Would it be that bad if people knew? But then she'd remember how nice it was to just be Rhea, the girl who took great photos, wrote decent essays, and always had an extra pencil to lend. Not the principal's daughter, not that girl whose dad runs the school, just Rhea. As she sat in her morning classes, watching the usual school day unfold, she had no idea that everything was about to change. She couldn't have known that one teacher's misguided attempt at a lesson would shatter the careful balance they'd created. For now, she was just another sophomore, scribbling notes, checking her phone when teachers weren't looking, and counting down the minutes until lunch. The secret felt safe, wrapped in the ordinary rhythm of high school life. But secrets, as Rhea would soon learn, have a way of breaking free at the most unexpected moments, changing everything in their wake. Chemistry class was usually Ria's favorite part of the day. The way elements combined to create something entirely new reminded her of photography, how light and shadow could merge to tell unexpected stories. But today, something felt off. Ms. Walker wasn't her usual self as she strode into the classroom, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor with unusual purpose. Today, Ms. Walker announced, setting down her coffee cup with a sharp tap, "We're going to conduct a different kind of experiment." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. One about social chemistry. The classroom grew quiet. Even Dev and Aiden, who usually whispered jokes throughout class, stopped their constant commentary. There was something in Ms. Walker's tone that made everyone sit up straighter. "You see," she continued, pulling out a stack of papers from her briefcase, "we talk about reactions and compounds, but we never discuss the most interesting chemistry of all, the way social status and economic background affect our daily interactions." Ria felt her stomach tighten. She'd always thought Ms. Walker was different from other teachers, more unpredictable, more willing to push boundaries. Sometimes that made class exciting, but right now, something in her teacher's expression made her want to sink into her chair and disappear. "I've prepared a little exercise," Ms. Walker said, shuffling through her papers with deliberate slowness. "We're going to explore how our parents' occupations and income levels influence our social dynamics. Think of it as a real-world economics lesson." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the classroom. Ria watched as her classmates exchanged uncertain glances. Next to her, Mai shifted nervously in her seat, probably thinking about her parents' restaurant and how some kids already made annoying comments about it. "Don't worry," Ms. Walker said, misreading the room's tension as simple shyness. "I've done my research. We'll make this completely factual." She tapped her papers against the desk, arranging them with unnecessary precision. "I've gathered some interesting information from the school's database. Very enlightening." Ria's heart began to race. The school database? That couldn't be legal, could it? She thought about her father's frequent reminders about student privacy and data protection. Just last week, he'd been working late, updating the school's privacy policies. "Let's start with..." Ms. Walker's eyes scanned the classroom, and Ria found herself praying to become invisible. "Ah, yes. Raj, tell us about your father's job at the tech company." "I believe he's a senior developer." Raj, usually confident and outspoken, seemed to shrink in his seat. Yeah. He works in software development." "And would you like to share his salary range, or shall I?" Ms. Walker's smile grew sharper. Before Raj could respond, she continued, "According to my research, it's quite impressive." "Upper six figures, isn't it?" The classroom erupted in whispers. Raj's face burned red as he stared at his desk. This was wrong, so wrong, and everyone knew it, but nobody knew how to stop it. Moving on, Ms. Walker continued, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was creating. "May, your parents own the Golden Dragon restaurant on Oak Street, correct? Let's talk about small business economics." May's eyes filled with tears. "Ms. Walker, I don't think." Now, this is educational. We're learning about real-world financial structures." Ms. Walker waved away May's protest. "The restaurant industry can be quite challenging, especially for family-owned businesses." Ria felt sick. She watched as her best friend tried to maintain composure while Ms. Walker rattled off details about restaurant profit margins and operating costs. Other students were starting to look uncomfortable too, even those who hadn't been called out yet. "This is messed up," Dev whispered from behind Ria. "Someone should get the principal." The principal, her father, who had no idea his daughter was sitting in a classroom where a teacher was violating every ethical guideline in existence. Ria's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone under her desk, wondering if she should text him. But wouldn't that just make everything worse? And now, Ms. Walker's voice cut through Ria's thoughts. "We'd have an especially interesting case." She pulled out a particular sheet of paper, holding it like a trophy. "Ria dear, why don't you stand up?" The room seemed to tilt sideways. Ria gripped the edges of her desk, her knuckles turning white. She could feel every eye in the room turn toward her. "You see, class," Ms. Walker's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Sometimes the most fascinating social dynamics are the ones hidden right in front of us. Would anyone like to guess what makes Ria's case so special?" Please no, Ria thought. Please no. It seems our quiet little Rhea here has been keeping quite a secret. Ms. Walker paused for dramatic effect, clearly savoring the moment. According to these records, she shares a last name and address with none other than our esteemed Principal Kumar. The silence that followed was deafening. Rhea could hear her own heartbeat, feel the heat rising in her face. 3 months of careful navigation, of building genuine friendships, of being just another student, all of it shattered in one cruel moment. That's right, class. We have royalty among us. Ms. Walker's laugh felt like ice down Rhea's spine. The principal's daughter, hiding in plain sight. Now, shall we discuss administrative salaries in public education? But Rhea wasn't there to hear the rest. She was already moving, her chair scraping against the floor as she stood. Her legs felt like they might give way, but somehow they carried her to the door. She heard May call her name, heard the rising buzz of voices behind her, but she didn't stop. The hallway stretched before her, impossibly long and empty. Somewhere in this building, her father was probably in his office, unaware that their carefully maintained privacy had just been weaponized against his daughter. Unaware that everything was about to change. Rhea ran. The girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor had always been Rhea's secret hideout. Nobody really used it because it was far from most classrooms, and the flickering light above the mirror had been broken since forever. Right now, that suited her perfectly. She sat on the cold tile floor, knees pulled up to her chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her phone buzzed for the 20th time. Mai had been texting nonstop since she'd run out of class. The latest message read, "Ms. Walker is in big trouble. Half the class already reported her to their counselors. Please talk to me." But how could she talk to anyone right now? The carefully constructed wall between her school life and her father's role had just crumbled in the most humiliating way possible. She could already imagine the whispers spreading through the hallways, racing from classroom to classroom, probably reaching all the way to the cafeteria where the lunch ladies would be setting up for the day. The bathroom door creaked open. Rhea held her breath. "I knew you'd be here," May's voice echoed off the tiled walls. "You always hide in the broken bathroom when you're upset." Rhea didn't look up, but she heard May slide down to sit beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distant sound of changing classes filtered through the walls, lockers slamming, voices rising and falling, life going on somehow. "You know," May finally said, "when my parents first opened the restaurant, I was so embarrassed. All the other kids' parents had these fancy office jobs, and mine worked 16 hours a day making noodles and dumplings. I used to pretend they did something else." Rhea wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "That's different." "Is it?" Mai bumped her shoulder gently against Rhea's. "Hiding part of who you are because you're afraid of how people will react? Sounds pretty similar to me." Before Rhea could respond, the bathroom door opened again. This time it was Mrs. Patel, the school counselor. Her kind face showed concern, but also something else. Anger? That was new. Mrs. Patel was known for her endless patience. "Rhea, honey," she said softly, "your father would like to see you in his office, but only if you feel ready." Her father. Of course he knew by now. How many students had reported it? How many teachers? How was he handling this, trying to be both principal and dad in a situation that demanded both roles? "I should go," Rhea managed to say, her voice scratchy from crying. She stood up, legs shaky. "Want me to walk with you?" May offered. Rhea shook her head. "I need to do this alone, but thanks for everything." The walk to her father's office felt like walking through a fishbowl. Students stopped their conversations to stare as she passed. Some quickly looked away, others whispered behind their hands. A few offered sympathetic smiles, but most seemed unsure how to react to this new version of Rhea, the one whose identity had been forcibly rewritten in the span of one class period. Near the science wing, she heard a snippet of conversation, probably got straight A's because of her dad. The words hit her like a physical blow. Is that what people would think now? That everything she'd achieved was because of her father's position? Outside the principal's office, his secretary, Mrs. Chen, gave her a warm smile. "Go right in, dear. He's waiting." Rhea had been in this office before, of course. Sometimes she'd drop off his forgotten lunch or pick up house keys he'd left on his desk. But it had always been early morning or after school hours when the halls were empty. Now, in the middle of the school day, with everyone knowing who she was, it felt different. More official, more exposed. She opened the door to find her father standing by the window, his back to the door. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face made fresh tears spring to her eyes. It wasn't the stern principal who greeted her, it was just her dad, worried and hurting for his daughter. "Papa," she started, but her voice broke. He crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her into a hug. For a moment, they just stood there, neither speaking. Through the open window, Raya could hear the distant sound of gym class on the field, sneakers squeaking on the basketball court, normal school sounds that seemed impossible now. "I'm so sorry," he finally said, stepping back to look at her. "Mrs. Patel told me what happened. What Ms. Walker did, it was completely unprofessional and unethical. She had no right to access those records, let alone share them." "Everyone knows now," Raya whispered. "Everything's going to be different." Her father sighed, running a hand through his hair. A gesture so familiar it almost made her smile despite everything. "Yes, it will be different. But maybe," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "maybe different doesn't have to mean worse." He guided her to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk, but instead of taking his usual seat behind it, he pulled the other chair close to hers. "We tried to protect you by keeping this secret," he said quietly. "But secrets can be heavy things to carry. And sometimes, when they're revealed, we find out we were stronger than we thought we were." "But what about my grades?" "My friends? Everyone's going to think." "Let them think what they want," he interrupted gently. "You and I know the truth. Your teachers know the truth. Ms. Rodriguez just told me yesterday how your photography project was one of the best she's seen in years." That had nothing to do with me being principal. A knock on the door interrupted them. Vice Principal Torres poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but the superintendent is on line 1. He needs to discuss the situation." Rhea watched her father's face shift slightly, dad mode to principal mode, though not completely this time. The lines were blurring, and maybe that was okay. "Take all the time you need," he told her, squeezing her shoulder as he stood. "You can stay here, go back to class, or go home, whatever feels right to you. Just remember," he paused at his desk, "you have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing at all." As he picked up the phone, Rhea sat there, letting his words sink in. Through the office window, she could see students crossing the courtyard, their lives intersecting and separating in endless patterns. Like one of her photographs, the scene was shifting, the light and shadows rearranging themselves into something new. Different didn't have to mean worse. Maybe it was time to step out of the shadows and into whatever light was waiting on the other side of this day. News travels fast in high school, but bad news travels at light speed. By the time lunch period rolled around, the story of what happened in Ms. Walker's chemistry class had grown into something almost mythical. Some said Raya had stormed out screaming, she hadn't. Others claimed Ms. Walker had pulled up tax records and bank statements, she hadn't done that either. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishments. Rhea sat alone at her usual lunch table, pushing rice around her plate. The cafeteria hummed with whispered conversations, and she could feel eyes darting toward her every few seconds. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from people who'd never texted her before, mostly variations of "OMG, is it true? This seat taken." Rhea looked up to find Raj standing there, lunch tray in hand. Her stomach tightened. He'd been the first one Ms. Walker had targeted in class. "Look," he said, sitting down without waiting for an answer, "what happened today was messed up. But you're not the only one she embarrassed." Before Raya could respond, Maine appeared with her lunch, followed by Dev and Aiden. Soon, their usual lunch group had assembled, acting as if nothing had changed. Except everything had. "My mom's already called the school board," May announced, opening her lunch container. "She says what Ms. Walker did violated like 50 different privacy laws." "My parents too," Raj added. "Dad's a tech guy, remember?" He smiled wryly. "He knows all about data protection regulations. He's pretty mad." Across the cafeteria, Rhea noticed a group of seniors pointing and whispering. One caught her eye and quickly looked away. She felt her face heat up. "Ignore them," Dev said, following her gaze. "They're just mad because they spent 3 years trying to get out of detention by sucking up to the wrong people. If they'd known you were the principal's daughter." "That's exactly what I don't want," Rhea interrupted. I don't want people thinking I get special treatment or that I'm some kind of spy for the administration. Anyone who thinks that is an idiot, Aiden declared, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You've been here 3 months and never once used your connection. That says more about you than this whole mess. The support of her friends felt like a warm blanket on a cold day, but it couldn't completely shield her from reality. As lunch continued, she noticed the way conversations at other tables would stop when she looked their way, how some students took the long way around to avoid passing near her table. Meanwhile, the administrative response was in full swing. Through the cafeteria windows, Raya could see important-looking people hurrying in and out of the main office. Her father had been in meetings all morning, and Mrs. Chen had looked frazzled when Raya passed by earlier. "Hey," a quiet voice said. Raya turned to find Lisa from her art class standing nervously by their table. "I just wanted to say, your photo series about hidden perspectives in everyday objects. It won the contest fair and square. Ms. Rodriguez had us vote blindly. Nobody knew they were yours." "Thanks," Raya managed to say, touched by this unexpected support. As Lisa walked away, May squeezed Ria's hand under the table. "See? Not everyone's awful." The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispers and stares. In English class, Mr. Park treated her exactly the same as always, calling on her once and accepting her somewhat distracted answer with his usual patience. In history, though, she noticed Mrs. Singh seemed almost nervous around her, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. After school, Raya found herself walking toward the newspaper room out of habit. She was supposed to be working on a feature about the upcoming winter formal. Now that felt like a story from another lifetime. "You coming in?" It was Priya, the editor-in-chief, standing in the doorway. "Because we could really use your help. This is probably going to be our biggest issue of the year." Ria froze. "You're writing about?" "About a teacher violating student privacy. About abuse of database access? About the school board's response." Priya listed off. "Yeah, we're covering it, but we're doing it right. No gossip, no speculation, just facts." Inside the newspaper room, the usual after-school chaos was amplified. Students hunched over computers, transcribing interviews. Others huddled in corners, discussing angle approaches. On the whiteboard, someone had written privacy violation. Who, what, when, which ARA, why? "We're not going to focus on you," Priya assured her. "You're part of the story, but you'll not be a story. The real issue is about ethics, privacy, and professional conduct. Plus," she added with a slight smile, "we could really use a photographer for the school board meeting tomorrow." Ria hesitated. Part of her wanted to run home and hide until this all blew over. But another part, a stronger part, recognized this moment for what it was, a chance to take control of the narrative. "Okay," she said, pulling out her camera. "But I want to help write it too. Not about me, but about everything else. About why student privacy matters." Priya's smile widened. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." As the afternoon wore on, Raya found herself caught up in the familiar rhythm of newspaper work. She helped fact-check statements, suggested questions for interviews, and reviewed the school's privacy policy documents, which, ironically, she understood better than most thanks to all those dinner table conversations with her father. Around 5 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from home. "Mom's making your favorite dinner. Take your time if you're working, but don't miss out on the biryani. Dad." Rhea smiled at her phone. Somehow, in the middle of this chaos, her parents were still just her parents. Her dad was dealing with a major school crisis, but he still took time to text about dinner. Looking around the busy newspaper room, she realized something important. Life wasn't going back to normal, but maybe it could move forward to something different. Something that might even be better than hiding. "Hey, Priya," she called out. "I think I have an idea for a follow-up story. Something about transparency, trust, and why sometimes the hardest secrets to keep are the ones we don't need to hide at all." The next morning, Roosevelt High School felt different. Television news vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray sky like metal flowers. Rhea spotted at least 3 reporters trying to interview students as they walked in. Principal Kumar, her father, had sent out an email the night before asking everyone to avoid speaking to the media. "This is crazy," May whispered as they hurried past the cameras. "It's like we're in some kind of movie. Inside, the hallways buzzed with nervous energy. A substitute teacher stood outside Ms. Walker's classroom, looking uncomfortable as students filed in for first period chemistry. The nameplate beside the door had already been removed. Vice Principal Torres's voice crackled over the intercom during homeroom. "Attention students. There will be a special assembly during third period. All classes will be adjusted accordingly. Thank you for your cooperation during this time." Raya sat in the back of the auditorium, sandwiched between May and Raj. She watched her father approach the podium, noting how he stood straighter than usual, his face serious but calm. This was the side of him she rarely saw, the experienced educator who had handled school crises before. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "By now, you're all aware of yesterday's incident involving Ms. Walker and several of our students. I'm here to address this situation directly and transparently." The usual whispers and rustling that accompanied school assemblies were notably absent. Every student seemed to be holding their breath. First, Ms. Walker has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation by the school board. This is standard procedure when dealing with potential violations of student privacy. He paused, adjusting his glasses, a gesture Rhea recognized as one of his nervous habits, though few others would notice. Second, we've discovered that Ms. Walker accessed confidential student information without authorization. Our department is currently reviewing and strengthening our database security protocols. We're also bringing in external consultants to audit our systems. In the front row, Raya could see the newspaper team furiously taking notes. Priya had somehow managed to get official press credentials for the school paper, and she was treating this like the serious news story it was. But most importantly, her father continued, his voice softening slightly, "I want to address the human aspect of this situation. Several students had their privacy violated yesterday. Personal information about their families was shared without consent. This is not just about broken rules, it's about broken trust." The auditorium was so quiet you could hear the heating system humming in the background. "Some of you may have heard that one of those students was my daughter." He didn't look in Rhea's direction, and she was grateful for that. "While this makes the situation personal for me, it doesn't change how we would handle any violation of student privacy. Every student in this school deserves to feel safe and respected. Every family has the right to privacy." Rhea felt May squeeze her hand. Around the auditorium, she could see students nodding, some turning to whisper to their friends. "Moving forward, we will be implementing several changes. All staff will undergo additional training on privacy protocols. We're establishing a student privacy committee to help develop new guidelines. And we're bringing in counselors to support any students who need to talk about these events." After the assembly, the hallways were filled with animated discussions. Rhea overheard snippets as she walked to her next class. "My mom's a teacher at another school. She says Ms. Walker could lose her license. Did you see the news vans outside? My brother said it's on all the local channels. I heard the school board is having an emergency meeting." In the library during study hall, Rhea found herself surrounded by an unlikely group. The newspaper team had set up camp at their usual table, but they'd been joined by students from various social circles, all wanting to share their stories about Ms. Walker. "She did something similar last semester," a quiet junior named Akash revealed. "Made comments about my dad's job at the gas station. I never reported it because I thought maybe I was being too sensitive. She asked about my mom's disability benefits in front of everyone," another student added. "I felt so embarrassed, but I didn't know who to tell." Priya documented everything, her fingers flying over her laptop keyboard. "This is bigger than one incident," she said. "It's a pattern." By lunchtime, more parents had arrived at school, some to check on their kids, others to meet with administration. Rhea spotted Raj's father, still in his tech company polo shirt, striding purposefully toward the main office. Mrs. Patel was running a constant stream of impromptu counseling sessions in the guidance office. In the cafeteria, something unexpected was happening. Instead of the usual cliques, students were mixing more freely, sharing stories and opinions about the situation. The wall between different social groups seemed to have cracked slightly, united by this shared experience. "Your dad's handling this really well," Dev told Rhea as they stood in the lunch line. "My parents were impressed by his email last night. Very professional, but also kind of human, you know." Ria nodded, thinking about how her father had stayed up late drafting that email, running different versions by her mom until the words felt right. How he'd asked Ria's opinion too, wanting to make sure it struck the right balance. After school, she found herself walking toward her father's office. The crowd of reporters outside had thinned, but a few persistent ones remained. Mrs. Chen waved her straight in. Her father was on the phone, but he smiled when she entered. "Yes, Superintendent," he was saying, "we'll have the full report ready by tomorrow morning. Yes, the external review team is all ready, of course. Thank you for your support in this matter." He hung up and loosened his tie slightly. "Long day." "The longest," Raya agreed, collapsing into one of the chairs. "But also, maybe not as bad as I thought it would be." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "People are talking about the real issues now: privacy, respect, how teachers treat students. It's not just about me being your daughter anymore. It's bigger than that." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to start important conversations." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I wouldn't have chosen this particular conversation starter." Through the window, they could see students heading to various after-school activities. The newspaper team was huddled on a bench, probably planning their coverage. The student council president was putting up posters for an emergency forum on student rights. "We're going to make changes," her father said quietly. "Real ones. The school board is fully behind us on this. Sometimes good things can come from difficult situations." Ria thought about all the stories she'd heard today, all the students who'd finally felt brave enough to speak up. "Yeah," she said. "I'm starting to see that." A week after the incident, Roosevelt High School was starting to feel like a different place. The media vans had disappeared, replaced by something more meaningful change. It started small, with handmade posters appearing on the walls: "Privacy matters" and "Respect each other's stories." The student council had turned it into a full campaign, complete with buttons that many students now wore on their backpacks. Raya stood in front of her locker, adjusting her camera strap. The school newspaper had given her a special assignment, documenting the transformation happening around them. Through her lens, she captured moments that told a bigger story: students from different grades working together on the new privacy guidelines, teachers attending voluntary training sessions, and most importantly, people talking openly about things that used to be kept quiet. Ready for the big meeting? May appeared beside her, holding a stack of papers. She'd been chosen as one of the student representatives for the newly formed Privacy and Ethics Committee. "Almost," Raya replied, checking her camera battery. "I still can't believe they're letting me photograph it." "Why not? You're the reason it's happening." "No," Raya shook her head. "Ms. Walker is the reason it's happening, and all the other students who came forward after." The meeting was being held in the library, which had been transformed for the occasion. Tables were arranged in a large circle, with nameplates marking spaces for school board members, teachers, parents, and students. Ria's father sat next to the superintendent, both of them reviewing documents as people filed in. "Before we begin," the superintendent announced once everyone was seated, "I want to acknowledge the courage it took for students to speak up about their experiences. This committee exists because you were brave enough to tell your stories." Ria moved around the room quietly, capturing different angles with her camera. She photographed Raja's father, still in his tech company polo, explaining database security to an attentive school board member. She caught Mrs. Patel sharing statistics about student counseling sessions since the incident. Through her viewfinder, she saw her own father listening intently as students spoke, his pen moving across his notepad. "The issue goes beyond just privacy," Akash was saying. He'd overcome his usual shyness to speak. "It's about dignity, about not feeling ashamed of who your parents are or what they do for a living." Other students nodded in agreement. One by one, they shared stories, not just about Ms. Walker, but about subtle comments, assumptions, and judgments they'd faced. Each story built on the last, creating a picture of why change was needed. "We've drafted initial recommendations," Priya announced, standing to distribute copies of the newspaper's special report. "Based on student interviews, expert consultations, and research into best practices from other schools." Raya lowered her camera for a moment, amazed at how much had changed in a week. The same students who'd once whispered behind her back were now working alongside her. The teachers who'd been awkward around her were engaging openly, asking for student input on new classroom policies. During a break in the meeting, she overheard two school board members talking. Remarkable how they've turned this incident into something positive. Yes, and the students' recommendations are surprisingly thorough. Her father caught her eye across the room and gave her a subtle thumbs up. She smiled back, remembering their conversation from last night. Sometimes, he told her over dinner, leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe enough to find answers together. The afternoon sun slanted through the library windows as the meeting continued. Dev and Aidan presented research they'd done on privacy policies at other schools. A parent committee member shared legal guidelines about student data protection. Teachers discussed ways to make their classrooms more inclusive and respectful of different family backgrounds. We should also talk about the photo exhibition, Mrs. Rodriguez spoke up. As the art teacher, she'd been particularly supportive through everything. Ria's pictures tell this story better than any report could. Raya felt her face warm as heads turned toward her. She'd been so busy documenting everyone else's contributions that she'd almost forgotten about her own project. Yes, Priya agreed. We're planning to run a selection of the photos alongside our coverage. They show how the whole school came together. As if to prove her point, Ria's next photograph captured something powerful. The superintendent leaning forward to listen to a freshman's suggestion, the school board president taking notes on a student's recommendation, parents and teachers and students all focused on the same goal. After the meeting, people lingered in small groups, continuing discussions that had started during the official session. Raya packed up her camera, feeling satisfied with the day's shots. "Hey," a voice called. She turned to find Lisa from art class. "Some of us are starting a new club, Students for Ethical Education. We could use a photographer for our events." Before Raya could respond, more students joined them, each adding ideas. "We could do workshops about privacy rights. Maybe start a mentoring program. Create guidelines for teachers about discussing family backgrounds." Her father appeared beside her, looking both tired and happy. "Quite a transformation, isn't it?" he said quietly. Raya looked around the library. At May, deep in conversation with board members about policy changes. At Raj, explaining technology safeguards to interested parents. At Priya, organizing her notes for what would surely be another powerful article. "Yeah," she agreed. "But maybe this is who we were all along. We just needed a reason to show it." As people began to leave, Raya took one final photo. Not of the official proceedings or the formal discussions, but of something simpler. Students from different grades and social groups walking out together, still talking, still planning, still working to make their school better. The late afternoon light caught the Privacy Matters buttons on their backpacks, making them shine. Through her lens, Raya saw what her father meant about leadership and what her friends had shown about courage. Most importantly, she saw what could happen when a community decided to learn from its mistakes instead of just moving past them. 1 month after Ms. Walker's social experiment, Roosevelt High School held a special evening event. The hallways were filled with photographs, news articles, and student artwork, all telling the story of how one difficult moment had sparked real change. Parents, students, and community members moved from display to display, many stopping to write comments on the feedback boards set up throughout the building. Raya stood near her photo exhibition, watching people's reactions. Her images told the story chronologically, from those first tense days of whispers and stares to the transformation that followed. She'd captured it all: the privacy committee meetings, students working together on new guidelines, teachers attending training sessions, and countless small moments of community building. "These are remarkable," said a woman Raya didn't recognize, gesturing to the photos. "You really captured the emotion of everything." "Thanks," Raya replied, no longer feeling awkward about accepting compliments. The past month had taught her a lot about owning her experiences, both good and bad. Nearby, May was leading a group through the student rights and privacy display she'd helped create. Her voice carried clearly as she explained the new policies that had been implemented. Every student now has access to their own records, so they know exactly what information the school maintains. We've also established clear guidelines about how personal information can be discussed in classrooms. The school newspaper's special edition was on display too, with Priya's in-depth coverage receiving particular attention. They'd even been interviewed by the local paper, which had run a story about how Roosevelt High had turned a privacy breach into an opportunity for positive change. "Look at this," Dev called out, pointing to the feedback wall. Someone had written, "My daughter goes to another school, and they're using Roosevelt's new privacy guidelines as a model. Thank you for leading the way." Raya felt a hand on her shoulder. It was her father, looking professorial in his suit, but with that proud dad smile she knew so well. "The superintendent just told me 3 other districts have contacted us about implementing similar programs," he said. "Sometimes the best solutions come from the hardest problems." They walked together through the exhibits, stopping to talk with different groups. No one acted strange about seeing them together anymore. The principal's daughter and the principal were just 2 people who'd helped their school community grow stronger. Near the library, a group of teachers was discussing the impact of the new training programs. Mrs. Rodriguez was showing off student artwork that explored themes of privacy, respect, and community. Mr. Park had created a writing wall where students shared their stories anonymously, each one adding to the larger narrative of change. "Remember when we thought keeping secrets was the best way to handle things?" Raya asked her father as they paused by a window. The setting sun cast long shadows across the school courtyard, where students were setting up for the evening's panel discussion. He chuckled softly. "We were trying to protect you. But sometimes protection isn't about hiding, it's about building something strong enough to withstand challenges." The panel discussion was held in the auditorium, which was packed with people from both Roosevelt High and neighboring communities. Raja's father spoke about technology and data protection. Mrs. Patel shared insights about supporting students through difficult transitions. Students from the new ethics committee presented their research and recommendations. When it was Ria's turn to speak, she felt surprisingly calm. The same room that had once heard Ms. Walker's cruel revelations now heard a different story, one of resilience, community, and positive change. "A month ago, I thought being the principal's daughter was something I had to hide," she began. "I was afraid people would treat me differently, judge me unfairly, or assume things about who I was. And for a little while, after the secret came out, some of those fears came true." She paused, looking out at the familiar faces in the audience. Her friends, her teachers, her school community. But then something unexpected happened. People started talking, not just about me, but about all the ways we make assumptions about each other. About how we handle personal information, about respect and dignity and the right to tell our own stories in our own way. But then something unexpected happened. People started talking, not just about me, but about all the ways we make assumptions about each other. About how we handle personal information, about respect and dignity and the right to tell our own stories in our own way. From her seat in the front row, May gave her a thumbs up. Next to her, Priya was taking notes, probably already planning the newspaper's follow-up coverage. "The truth is, none of us are just one thing. I'm not just the principal's daughter. I'm a photographer who loves capturing real moments. I'm a student who works hard for her grades. I'm a friend who's learned the value of authenticity. And I'm part of a community that chose to learn and grow from a difficult experience." After the panel, people lingered in the hallways, continuing conversations that had started during the formal presentations. The feedback walls were filled with new comments, each one adding to the story of how Roosevelt High had changed. "Your mom's biryani is amazing," May said, helping herself to another plate from the refreshment table. The evening had turned into an impromptu community dinner, with families sharing food and stories. "She stress cooks," Raya laughed. "She made enough for an army." Around them, the school buzzed with energy and conversation. New friendships were forming, ideas were being shared, and plans were being made for future initiatives. The Privacy and Ethics Committee had already scheduled meetings for the next semester. The student newspaper was planning a series on community building in schools. As the evening wound down, Raya found herself back at her photo display. The last image in the series was different from the others. It showed her and her father in his office, both of them working on the new school policies, completely at ease with their dual roles as family and school leaders. "That's my favorite," her father said, appearing beside her. "It shows who we really are." Rhea nodded, thinking about how far they'd come from those early days of careful secrets and separate entrances. "We're just people trying to make things better," she said. "That's who we've always been." Outside, the sun had set completely, but Roosevelt High School glowed with warmth and light. Through the windows, Raya could see people still talking, laughing, and sharing ideas. The secret was out, but something better had taken its place: truth, understanding, and a community that had learned to face challenges together.